Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. We've just had a new patch drop for December, this time with no public update preview for feedback, so it's already live. The big theme of this one seems to be a push for unique units, as well as a slight philosophical change in direction when it comes to balancing civilizations. I'm not sure everyone's going to love this new direction, but you'll see what I mean. In this video, we'll put the changes in some context and talk about what balance issues they're trying to address. First off, for general changes, chickens and hares are going from 65 to 75 food each. I'm not sure why they're avoiding 70 food, as that's half a deer, but given pushing deer is so much more efficient than milling chickens, an extra 5 food actually seems reasonable. To answer the important question, yes, 2 villagers can still gather the full amount in one trip, though notably Mayans and Jurchens can't do a clean trip with 2 villagers anymore, creating a low efficiency second trip unless you're keeping an eye on them. Either 3 villagers per chicken or a bit of micro is probably a good idea for those 2 civs. The next change is undoing one from 2 years ago, dropping the Eagle Warrior's cost by 5 food, and they do this kind of reverting old changes a few times in the patch. Obviously food in the late game isn't an issue, but for feudal Eagle Scouts, or even to some extent in Castle Age, this is a decent buff for the American civs, who really aren't at the top of the ladder these days like they once were. Another infantry-related change is Gambesons is dropping its food cost by 50. Infantry doesn't necessarily need a buff, but considering the second infantry armor is 300 resources and adds 1 melee and pierce armor, 150 resources for 1 pierce armor in Gambesons actually feels like the going rate. The last of the general changes are then to the traction Trebuchet, slowing down its reload time by about 20% and movement speed by 5%, but giving it 55 more bonus damage against buildings. For context, the Trebuchet does just under 2,600 damage per minute to castles, and bombard cannons a little over 2,000, with no masonry or siege engineers involved. The traction Trebuchet previously did 1,393, and now does 1,440, so just a 3% improvement once that slower attack rate comes into play. This slightly disguises the fact they're doing 26% more damage per shot, so one-shotting buildings with a large group is definitely a fair bit easier now. The real impact, though, is they're a lot harder to micro against onagers, trebuchets, or enemy units, as they move slower and they have to wait an extra 2 seconds between every shot. That's it for general changes, though, and now let's talk about these civilization-specific balance changes. The first is for the Armenians, who are having their warrior priest cost drop by 10 gold. Personally, I think it's a cool unique unit idea as an infantry and monk hybrid, so I'm actually in favor of seeing it more often. You'll notice there's a theme in this patch to push unique units, which is starting off early. Next up, there's a small change for Bulgarians, who can now train Tatars at the Krepost. I could see this being handy on Arena for instance, and remember last August they let Krepost upgrade the Elite Conic as well, so it feels like they're trying to standardize that building to be more like a castle. It doesn't feel like they're genuinely trying to buff Bulgarians, who are actually doing okay, especially at lower levels, in the more infantry-dominated meta this year. Moving on to Burgundians, there's a little tinkering change, giving Flemish Militia a 0.04 tile per second speed bump. I deep dived this unit a while back and was a bit underwhelmed, especially since they missed out on the speed increase given to the swordsman line up to 0.96 tiles per second. Flemish Militia are still a tiny bit slower than longswords, skirmishers, and archers, but functionally at this point I would say they're close enough. It was always a bit awkward to have this unit be a tiny bit slower than a bunch of things in feudal particularly, and noticeably slower than the swordsman line and pikemen that it's trying to be a hybrid between. The next change is I think a revealing one about the different design philosophy the devs are leaning into this patch with the Georgians. They're having their fortified churches add 1 tile to their reach, maybe hitting a few more villagers with that plus 10% work rate boost. The other change is their Imperial unique tech, giving them even more pop space for cavalry units and decreasing the cost of that tech, which should allow you to make an extra 4 or 5 cavalry in the late game in a 200 pop game. Georgians are interesting because since the nerf to their cavalry healing rate, they've actually become a fairly weak mid-game civ according to the stats. The fortified church buff at least kind of addresses that, albeit in a pretty minor way, while making the Imperial Age unique tech stronger is clearly a buff to the Georgian late game, and feels like they're doubling down on where the civ was already quite good. This is that new pattern I keep alluding to in this patch, and we'll see it a few more times. Moving on, we have the Jurchens, who are having their Iron Pagoda's attack rate increased by 6%, and then having their bonus increasing the attack rate for all mounted units, including cavalry archers and fire lancers, bumped up by 5%. Notice Iron Pagodas are improved twice here, with a double-digit attack rate boost. The Iron Pagoda buff does hit the right time, but also has the knock-on effect that their Scout Rush and Step Lancers are now even better, so either way Jurchens are coming out as a winner. Next up, we have the Khitans, who are getting a mix of a buff and nerf. The buff is to their mounted Trebuchet, having a larger fire area, and the fire will last 25% longer. I personally find that unit a bit underwhelming, so no complaints there. The nerf is then to their pasture, going from 100 to 110 wood each and adding 4 seconds to their build time, while having a roughly corresponding increase to their food per pasture, so the wood to food ratio is staying basically the same. Khitans are maybe a little too strong in mid-elo, and this will make that transition onto pastures a bit harder. Keep in mind, they still have a great scout opening with +2 attack from forging and faster training on those units, while eventually their pastures are also just flat out better than farms in collection rate and have that more continuous drop-off. But you can see them at least trying to slow down that snowball, particularly in Castle Age as you're trying to get downtown centers and expand your food economy just as your first round of pastures are being exhausted. That 10 extra wood cost each should really add to that wood crunch. Moving on, next we have the Persians, with another instance of reverting to an old balance, this time from early 2020, dropping their commander on crossbows to 50 wood each. Personally, I think it's funny how broken this unique tech sounded initially, and where we are now, though I also don't think this will really move the needle for the civilization. Next up, we have the shoe, whose bonus for passive food generated from lumberjacks is dropping from 9 to 7%, after remember being 10% initially. The shoe are winning a lot, particularly at high elo, and hitting an eco bonus is always a very safe way to address that. They're actually the #1 civ right now for 1200 plus elo, averaging across all maps, so you could argue they're actually getting off fairly light here. For a bit of context, it's on the order of around 50 less food over the course of a 10-minute feudal age with 10 lumberjacks, so it's not a huge nerf, but the bonus is definitely a factor in their success. Moving on, we have the Spanish, with their elite conquistador going up by 1 attack and dropping 300 food off their elite upgrade. There's definitely a perception that it's a great unit in Castle Age, but isn't that amazing in Imperial, so I think it makes a lot of sense to target the elite version specifically here, and this might actually be my favorite change of the patch. The thing that felt really underwhelming to me about the elite version is that units like Arblaster get +1 attack from their unit upgrade, plus Bracer and Chemistry for +3 overall, which outpaces the +2 Pierce armor many units get in Imperial Age. Conquistadors, on the other hand, went from 16 to 18 attack, so basically offsetting an enemy's armor upgrade, but not any HP increase that units often get in Imperial, meaning Conquistadors kind of fell behind in a way. In fairness, lowering their Castle Age attack by 1 would have had the same effect, but again, buffing unique units seems like the plan this patch. Another example of that is the Tatars, whose Keshik is gaining 10 HP in Castle Age and 5 in Imperial, while having its elite upgrade drop by 300 gold. I'm not sure if this is really meant to buff Tatars, as from the stats, it's super obvious it's their early game holding them back, and they're already a good civ from the point you have Keshiks in later. I think this is specifically about seeing that one unit more often, which at this point compares quite favorably to the Nightline, especially when you consider their much cheaper gold cost, quick training time, and slightly faster movement rate. Their gold trickle also makes them cheaper than they appear, so they're more like a 30 gold unit. Arguably, the unit was already being slept on, but I actually think most players already know it's decent. It's just Tatars are inherently pushed towards step lancers, crossbows with a thumb ring timing, and cavalry archers, that they just end up with more interesting things they can do than spam a unique unit, though maybe we will see it mixed in more often now. Next up, we have the Turks, going from 20 to 25% faster gold miners. Remember, this was plus 15% back in Age of Kings, so it's come a long way, and continues that interesting pattern this patch of doubling down on existing strengths. If you look at Turks, the obvious weak point is the early game, so if you were trying to buff the Civ, traditionally I feel that's where they would look, though you could argue this approach of doubling down on strengths actually helps Civ identities and making them feel more distinct. Then again, Turks are already #1 on Arena, and more gold just makes that fast Imperial Gunpowder or fast Castle Janissary plan even more dangerous, and I'd understand some pushback against this one. We'll end strong with the Wu, who are having their GN Swordsman training time increased by 30%. This unit is clearly a major factor in their success as a bit of an archer civ killer, and I suspect this will do exactly what they want to, which is make GN Swordsman feel less oppressive without nerfing the unit into oblivion. So those are the main patch highlights, but I should mention there are also 9 new maps that have been added to the game. They have a pretty consistent theme running throughout, of starting in a relatively safe place with walls or higher elevation, but you then have to venture out to control neutral resources and don't have a lot of safe woodlines, which just encourages more early raiding. The most interesting to me is the new map Thames, of course named after the river in London. On the north side of the map is a neutral building you control for plus 25 pop space, as if it's 5 houses, and also raises your cap to 225 pop, while the south end of the map has most of the neutral gold, stone, and hunt. So that's the December patch. The 3 changes I'll be keeping an eye on are the GN Swordsman training time nerf, the Keshik buff and to what extent that unit starts to show up more for Tatars, and the chickens being a bit better. Turks on Arena is the one I'm most nervous about for sure, and that change, along with the Georgian stronger late game, definitely stuck out to me a bit. Again, these are all live as of right now, without the usual early look preview. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.